The potential of Buddhism is a background philosophy for animal ethics and environmental ethics. Abstract. Toyohiko Hashiguchi ELB Study Center. I have been conducting research on the theme of the potential of Buddhism as a background philosophy for animal and environmental ethics. In 1975, a book titled Animal Liberation, written by an ethicist named Peter Singer, an Australian philosopher and is currently a professor at Princeton University, which thoroughly listed examples of cruel treatment of farmed and laboratory animals, shocked many people. In response, most of the Western developed countries accelerated the development of laws prohibiting the cruel treatment of farmed and laboratory animals. And the number of vegetarians and vegans has increased rapidly in order to abolish meat-eating habit. In this way, the concept of animal ethics and animal welfare policies began to spread worldwide from the mid-1970s onward. At about the same time, deforestation and environmental destruction became a major issue, and the concept of environmental ethics began to spread. In the environmental ethics, there are three main types. The first is the anthropocentric one, which says that the environment necessary for human survival should be preserved. The second is called ecocentrism, which says that human beings should make efforts to preserve ecosystems, and it allows for the extermination of alien species to protect native ecosystems. The third is called life-centrism, which says that all living things, including animals and plants, should be protected, but it still allows people to eat meat for their own survival. However, animal ethics, which opposes the killing of animals, and environmental ethics, which advocates the protection of forests and the environment but approves the killing of animals, are mutually contradictory claims, and there has yet to be an idea that is consistent with both. The following is a summary of the key points of how they contradict each other. First of all, Peter Singer's animal ethics, which I introduced earlier, is absolutely against the killing of animals that feel pain, but is indifferent to plants and other creatures that do not feel pain, and therefore cannot be an environmental ethics philosophy. On the other hand, anthropocentric environmental ethics, which is one of the three types of environmental ethics I mentioned above, accepts both meat-eating and deforestation to the extent that they do not adversely affect human survival. Ecosystem-centric environmental ethics is absolutely against the destruction of ecosystems, but exterminates invasive alien species. And biocentric environmental ethics respects all life, but allows meat-eating for the survival of human. All of these are incompatible with animal ethics in that they allow the killing of animals that feel pain. Thus, the two sides remain at odds with each other. In this paper, I have examined whether Buddhism can be a background philosophy for both animal and environmental ethics in the current situation of mutual contradiction between the two. In a nutshell, the idea that all living things should be cherished is derived from the Buddhist precepts of non-killing and compassion. In the Serpent chapter of the Suttanipata 8, Compassion, which is considered to be the oldest of the Buddhist scriptures, there is a verse as follows: just as a mother protects her only child even at the risk of her own life, so too should we have a heart of immeasurable compassion for all living beings. In this way, the Buddha commands us to protect all living beings, even at the cost of our own lives, as if they were our own children, in a very strong tone. Later, in Mahayana Buddhism, the meaning of such non-killing and compassion for all living beings was thoroughly elucidated as a necessity derived from the non-discriminatory wisdom attained by the Buddha. From the standpoint of the state beyond the distinction between self and others, it is not enough for one to be enlightened and free from suffering alone, but one must inevitably seek the liberation of all sentient beings from suffering. Therefore, those who seek enlightenment and aspire to the state of the non-discriminatory wisdom must devote their lives to freeing all sentient beings, including themselves, from suffering. Such a way of life is called the Bodhisattva way of life. From the enlightened perspective, even though suffering of sentient beings is ultimately insubstantial, until they themselves become aware of this fact, their suffering will continue to be generated, and it is the mission of bodhisattvas to lead them to enlightenment. Yet, such ideal of bodhisattva way of life to live our lives for the betterment of the living condition of others based on the premise of non-killing and compassion, was not widely practiced in reality. However, there was a Buddhist movement in China in 6th century during the Sui and Tang dynasty called the Sanjijiao 3 Degrees teaching, in which many people practiced the ideal of bodhisattva way of life, such as, with the understanding that all sentient beings are valuable like Buddhas, we must worship and benefit all of them and wishing for their happiness. When many of their followers really began to live for the benefit of others rather than themselves, a mutually supportive community was created. Such situation was not very convenient for those in power. Because, if people could create a mutually supportive community by themselves, then rulers become unnecessary. Because of this reason Sanji Zhao was thoroughly suppressed by the regime of the time and was completely erased from history. This means if people really start to live for the benefit of others, automatically a mutually supportive society can be created even in contemporary world. Thus, it seems that the state of indiscriminate wisdom that the Buddha attained, which is also the goal of bodhisattvas, and the idea of equality which derives from it can not only better the condition of human society but also it can surely become an idea that endorses both animal and environmental ethics. However, the similar idea which cherish all living beings can be seen also in deep ecology and life-centered environmental ethics, but they are incompatible with animal ethics in that they allow people to eat meat for their own survival, and above all, they are fundamentally different from Buddhism in that they allow people to decide whether others living beings can survive or not. Buddhism is concerned with the arrogance and greed of human beings. This is because Buddhism believes that human beings and other living beings are completely equal and therefore human beings have no right to decide whether other living beings can survive or not. Yet, there is also the question of whether the principle of cherishing all living beings is really feasible. In ethics, a philosophy without viability is considered unrealistic and inconsistent as ethics. In order to maintain consistency, exceptions are made to allow for actions that are contrary to the principles. This is why deep ecology and other life-centered ethical philosophies condone meat eating. However, by condoning acts that are contrary to the philosophy with exceptions, the philosophy itself becomes hollow. Buddhism believes that human beings do not have the authority to make any exceptions, and that the lack of viability is not a defect in the philosophy, but a defect in human existence itself. It teaches the arrogant and greedy human beings to live an ultimately humble life without interfering with the survival of others, and shows them the way to reduce their greed to an infinitesimal level to become beings who embody compassion for all living beings like Buddhas. So, the conclusion of this paper is as follows. With the current animal and environmental ethics philosophy that still endorses the greed and arrogance of human beings, when human beings decide the right to life of other living beings, the structure that other living beings become human sacrifices will never change. The fundamental Buddhist philosophy of cherishing all living beings is not an unrealistic philosophy that is impossible to implement, but it is a philosophy that can be realized by reducing the greed and arrogance of human beings who cannot implement it as it is. Only by overcoming our own greed and developing a boundless sense of humility toward other living beings can we realize these ideals one by one in the form of practical policies. This paper concludes that such Buddhistic approach should be essential for the future animal and environmental ethics.